we'll get started a little bit right now, and I'll take a few minutes to do some introductions, and then Lily Haynes is going to take over from the Clark Coalition's perspective and introduce Karen. My name is Greg Robitaille. My brother and I started Explore Maps 12 years ago. We opened this storefront maybe 5 months ago now, mid-November. We've been living in the two warehouses back behind those sliding doors for 6.5 years. It's a real passionate family adventure that we're on with my brother and both of our partners and spouses that we started 12 years ago. He lives in Kenya. He's the artist behind the 60 some odd maps that we've done. And a few hours ago this looked like a storefront, but Annie is right here. She's our store manager and she does group and event sales for Explore Maps. And Tara Schisler back here is our marketing director. And then there's 6 other people that are here that help Explore Maps go. The main reason we opened this storefront was to connect to the community differently than we have been as a business over the past 12 years. So even some of my closest friends, have been totally unaware that we had 60 some odd different maps in our collection. They thought we maybe had 10 or 15. So part of it was to introduce the community to more than just our Montana content, but really we designed the space so that we could do things like this. And we had no idea what that was really going to look like. So it's kind of taken on a life of its own. This series is Cartography Comes Alive, and most of you maybe either know or have met Mandela, who's a part of our team, who is going to be here maybe for about 7 of the 12 events throughout the year. But we're interested in bringing in people about public lands, about conservation, about community, about traveling, about adventure. Next, on Friday night, we're showing a film, Exploring Pequare, which is a partnership that we did with Ecology Project International here in Missoula. We released, it was a documentary film that my niece did, my brother's daughter, when Chris and Becca went down to Costa Rica for a week and kind of got to know our partners. So that was an amazingly proud moment for my brother and I, because she'd never done any documentary film or any filming ever in her life. And when she went down there, she didn't know that's what she was doing, but Uncle Greg basically said, hey, take some pictures, interview our partners, get to know the community. One thing led to another, and it ended up being a 30-minute documentary film. So if you didn't see it in November, it's only 30 minutes. We're super proud of it, and it just, again, it's another example of us connecting with a local nonprofit in Missoula that does work in Costa Rica. The other one coming up in May 15th, we have John Turk, who's a National Geographic explorer of renown, and he's going to be sharing adventures throughout his years as National Geographic explorer. I'm not sure exactly what the topic is, and I think that's part of the idea. Apparently we're not being told. But I think that sounds like it's going to be a fun adventure. The other thing I want to say is, before you leave, we'll just hand these 3 little things out. One that tells about Exploring Pequare. We also have, on April 23rd and 30th, our junior cartography series, where we're starting 1 or 2 days a week where we're having kids come in. The Paxton art teacher, Keela Cross, has started the first 3. Where they're doing, it's during the IWFF, so we're doing some paper mache globes, some paper mache wildlife art. Next month we're bringing in Missoula International School's art teacher, and those are our 2 neighborhood schools. So we're starting with those schools. They're not exclusive to those schools. So if you pay attention to our socials, or if you want any more information, that's out there. Please spread the word. www.exploremaps.com. Is that what you're saying, Tara? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. So yeah, we've had a lot of grandparents, bring little kids in. My grandkids came in. And so we want to get all ages of the community involved, from eldest to youngest, and hopefully we present different you know, talks and presentations that are of interest to a wide range of people. This just gives you 15% off. So anyone that shows up for these, we want to give this at 15% off that can be used either online or in our brick and mortar for any purchase that you want. So a couple of you have already asked me tonight. We have maps of 60 different places and about 16 states, 22 national parks, about 20 travel destinations. And so anything from blankets to canvas tote bags and whatever else you see here you can get with any of those 60 maps. And that's what this is for. Okay, so all I'm going to say about the Clark Fork River is that I moved here 30 years ago and I had never fly fished before. I'm originally from Toronto, so it was all bass and pike and pickerel fishing and, you know, yanking them out. So I worked at Missoula Athletic Club when it was the bubble before it got torn down. And I lived on First Street, so I would ride my bike back and forth to work. And a buddy of mine, well, Chris Nord, who many of you know, who was the tennis coach for many years, he introduced me to a couple spots on the river. I had a dog, Roxy, that lived to be 17, and so I spent literally 5, 6, 7 days a week on the Clark Fork River when I first moved here 30 years ago. And it looks and feels a lot different today than it did then. And my wife is born and raised here, so she tells me stories about, you know, growing up here when she was in high school, and it's a completely different river. I'm not going to say any more about that because these are the experts on that, but I think we can all thank these guys immensely for the work that they've done over the last 30 plus years.
Nearly 40.
Nearly 40, I didn't want to say that. Okay, but 30, my 30 years for sure. And to this day, I'm on that river 5 days a week, in one way, shape, or form. From pretty much now until the end of October, if I go home and I don't stop at the river, Julie usually says to me, honey, you need to turn around and go back. You missed your time at the river. So it's a happy place for me, and I'm sure it's a happy place for all of you guys, and I think we have these guys to thank for that. So, Lily, take it away.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'll get us kind of focused in on our amazing outgoing executive director who is speaking tonight, and the Clark Fork River. But first, thank you to Explorer Maps for having us here. At CFC, we're so excited that these guys have this storefront, and we're so excited about their drive and their vision for connecting community to the places that are important in the world. So we're super happy to be here. And I'm mostly here for a good time. So if you wanna click the slide, I'll give you guys a little bit of a taste of some of the fun we have planned for you, and then introduce Karen. We thought, you know, if you've been to another Explorer Map event, you know they're a good time. These people are lots of fun. How do we bring that in? We have some trivia game for you guys, and at the end of the night, we have some prizes for you. So, like Greg said, the river is an inspiration in so many ways. These questions are going to get harder as they go along, but our first question to you is, can you name the artist on this classic river song released in 1980 on an album of the same name? And it should come over the speaker here in just a second. Nope. Oh no, I messed it up, you guys. I had this so set up, but we're looking for the artist. I see a few hands in the air. Do not shout it out. The voice really gets it. That's all you're going to get.
Okay, write it down.
So go ahead and write it down, you guys. Throughout the presentation, we have some Clark Fork River trivia that'll come up on the screen. Karen will read the rest of the questions at the end of the night. You'll get all the answers, and then we have some prizes on the back table for folks who play along. But when we talk about inspiration, the rivers inspire us. I've had the honor and the pleasure of working for Karen Knudsen at the Clark Fork Coalition for the past 8 years. And when we talk about inspiration and transformational change on the Clark Fork River, her name goes right alongside of that. When we came up and we started to plan this talk, we had all kinds of ideas, and we really wanted a chance for people to tap in to somebody who has led so many changes and so much of our conservation efforts and has made a huge impact. What is that legacy? And Karen came up with the topic for the talk, thinking about maps and their importance and their value and connecting us to our place. And you know, we know Missoula's here and Deer Lodge is there, but when we talk about the legacy of Karen's leadership and of the Clark Fork Coalition, a lot of it has to do with what's not on the map in our watershed. And so with that, Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about 40 years of legacy in the watershed and helping decide what's there and what's not.
Awesome. Yeah, Lily. It is true. I am retiring in approximately 28 days. So I've got 28 more days to leave this organization, and who knows what crazy and wild things are going to happen. But nonetheless, what an incredible pleasure and a privilege to be able to spend one of my final formal evenings with all of you as part of this Cartography Comes Alive series. So thank you so much for the very warm welcome, and a huge thanks to Greg and the whole team at Explore Maps for inviting me and actually recognizing that river advocates have important stories to tell too. They may not get your heart racing like I'm certain Mandela's tales about swimming the Colorado River must have had last month, but with any luck, the stories that I share tonight will help give you a deeper appreciation for and maybe a stronger connection to the ever-evolving story of our hometown river, the Clark Fork. And also, I hope that maybe it inspires you to double down on getting involved and pitching in to help the hardworking Clark Fork become clean, healthy, and whole again. So, before we get started, quick show of hands. And I'm guessing it's going to be 100% of hands shooting into the air. How many people interact with the Clark Fork River pretty regularly? Yeah, well, okay, we've got some work to do. Not bad though. Okay, just shout outs. What do you do? What do you do on the river? What gives you joy?
Float.
Chase trout.
Paddle.
Watch it. I'm just watch.
Pictures.
Love it.
Scrape algae off the rocks. Collect bugs.
Awesome. Oh, this sounds great. Bugs, boating, watching, paddling. So it seems to me that we have a fully enthusiastic and completely engaged group of river lovers here, so this is going to be a fun evening. Okay, so moving on to tonight's presentation, we're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to shine the spotlight on the essential facts behind the Clark Fork. What makes it such an incredible river system, and a river system worth fighting for the long haul. Then we're going to take a look at how a century of unconstrained resource extraction pushed this river to the brink. And finally, we're going to have a look at the start of this restoration era. This time when we actually renew our relationship, recalibrate our relationship in terms of how people interact with the river. And we'll do this through the lens of my organization for the next 28 days, the Clark Fork Coalition. And we'll talk a little bit about their beginnings as a humble, community-based activist group and how over time it developed into a river movement that is notching important wins and taking on some of the most serious threats to the watershed. Sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. First off, Clark Fork watershed is river of life. Okay, big picture. You can see on this map with the Clark Fork Basin circled, but the Clark Fork is part of this big watery web in North America. These are our roots of life. Let's zoom in a little closer. Circled right here is the Clark Fork Basin, which encompasses about a third of the state, the western third of the state of Montana, on the entire west, with the exception of the Kootenai, west of the Continental Divide. So the Clark Fork watershed drains about 22,000 square miles of country on its journey from its headwaters of the Continental Divide near Butte, all the way to Lake Pend Oreille in Sandpoint, Idaho. Along that journey, it picks up water from such fabled tributaries as the Blackfoot, the Bitterroot, and the Flathead, which makes it a very big presence in the Northern Rockies, geographically, economically, and culturally. What about biologically? Well, it turns out the Clark Fork Coalition, the Clark Fork watershed, circled in red right there, also is a biological supermarket for this region. It sits right at this pivotal juncture of major landscapes where plant species, wildlife species, all interact in a landscape that's shaped by fire, floods, and wind. The end result is that the Clark Fork watershed has some of the richest montane habitat in the lower 48, where a myriad of species thrive, from birds to fish to predators, mammals, ungulates. A lot of critters make a living here. Well, as everyone knows, the Clark Fork watershed has also drawn in humans. Archaeological evidence shows that humans have been living in the watershed for almost 13,000 years. The Salish, Kalispel, Flathead, Pend Oreille, Kootenai, Nez Perce, Blackfeet, they have all been living here, following the path of water and sustained by bountiful life, by trout that you could even shoot with an arrow because they were so thick in the river, and bison. These also happen to be the tribes that Lewis and Clark encountered when they came through in 1804. And as we all know the story, that voyage of discovery expedition that Lewis and Clark set off on really ushered in a whole new era for the Clark Fork watershed. Oh, here we go. Interruption, trivia break. We're moving into another section. Okay, everybody, do you need lights or can you see okay?
You can see it.
Okay, the largest tributary water to join the Clark Fork River is which river? I love these trivia questions because I never even touch on any of this presentation, so good luck.
What are you saying?
Yeah, Joe, don't be
Give me a beat.
Everyone got an answer? Are you correct or made up? Ted, Deb, no consultation here. Did you sign the honor code? All right, we're going to move along. This is where we are all now teed up for the century of overuse. As we know from the stories, it's that voyage of discovery that really ushered in this new era, where we saw this spike in European migration, European settlement, and of course resource extraction. So first came the explorers and the mappers, then came the trappers and the fur traders, and finally the miners arrived and struck gold in the Upper Clark Fork in 1858. Now, things in the watershed didn't really take off on the resource extraction front until three things came together. The first was the discovery of thick veins of copper in the Butte area. Second was the advent of electricity. Third, the railroad. And when these three developments locked in and aligned, Butte went boom. The town ballooned from a small but raucous mining camp into a bustling city of 100,000 people, really giving even New York City and San Francisco a run for the money as one of America's greatest cities. Butte even stopped identifying as being part of Montana. They scratched Montana from a name and just went by Butte, America, which gives you a sense of the scale of the operation and the sense of themselves. So let's pause for a minute and talk about the scale of this mining and smelting enterprise that came crashing into the Clark Fork watershed. It was gigantic, massive, landscape dominating activity. And in fact, 3 subbasins were pressed into service. And I find this to be a really interesting fact about the history of the watershed. Because most people just mostly think of it as, oh, Upper Clark Fork. No, 3 subbasins. The Upper Clark Fork, of course, provided the minerals and carried off the waste. And sometimes in large volumes, especially when you've got a massive flood like we experienced in 1908. Then we have the Blackfoot. The Blackfoot supplied the trees and the logs that were carried down the river that fueled or that fed the mills and the smelters. And then we've got the Bitterroot. The Bitterroot was the breadbasket based on its climate. And so to grow all this food for this bustling enterprise, it required irrigated agriculture. And so as a result, we had hundreds of miles of irrigation canals and ditches built on the Bitterroot. So again, absolutely massive, large landscape enterprise that proceeded along for 100 years. And in that time, it lit up the world. The copper that came out of those mines lit up the world and supplied 2 world wars worth of ammunition. So just vast scale of vast production. Well, what happened? Why the sudden drop off there in 1982? Well, it turns out the price of copper dropped precipitously. And we had a new owner owning most of the mines, Arco. And they just couldn't stomach hanging in there. So they decided they would close the smelter, which happened in the late 1970s, and then eventually they closed the copper mines in 1982. So on the other side of those events, of course, we've got communities in 3 different subbasins in absolute turmoil. Suddenly that economy was gone. The other thing that we noticed, of course, in the aftermath of this century of frenzied mining and smelting, I guess this is a little cut off, but that's okay. We saw that there was mining contamination, mining waste coating the riverbanks, riverbeds, and floodplains of the entire Upper Clark Fork River. We also saw logging scars, erosion problems, sediment pollution, and the Blackfoot from all the intensive logging. And then in the Bitterroot, we saw streams that were completely dried up and stretches of the Bitterroot dried up because the irrigation canals were pulling more water out of the river than they were leaving behind. So in sum, what we had in the early 80s was a watershed that was overmined, overlogged, overgrazed, and just plain overworked. So all of the overworked piece, that in some ways is just a perfect reflection of the mindset of the times. The dominant mindset of the times was that rivers were workhorses. They were waste receptacles, and basically fair game to industry, any kind of industry use and exploitation. However, there was a small group of people, a growing group of people, and I'm thinking many of you are among that group. There's a growing group of people that saw things differently. They were imagining a different vision for the Clark Fork watershed. One in which the Clark Fork River flowed clean and healthy. It was wild and wonderful, a place of connection and a source of life. So, how to give this new vision life? Well, it turns out the spark wasn't something that you'd think would be super dramatic. It wasn't, say, a gold mine that was proposed for the Butte area, which it turns out was Pegasus mine, but we'll get to that later. Nope. Turns out the spark was this pulp mill, owned at the time by Champion, just downstream of Missoula, right next to Frenchtown. So the year was 1984, and Champion Pulp Mill was struggling with some settling ponds. They were failing. This was kind of a new technology for them. They were getting accustomed to having environmental regulations and permits. So they simply asked the state of Montana if they could increase their polluted discharge into the Clark Fork River to handle this settling pond problem. Well, that's all it took. There was immediate public outcry, and it turns out that people all the way from Anaconda, the sportsman groups up there, and all the way to Sandpoint, Idaho, Lake Pend Oreille, came together, piled into buses, packed the public hearings, wrote letters, called officials, and said, no, don't even think about it. The message was unified and the message was clear. This is not how we treat our river any longer. The Clark Fork is a source of life. It's time to start treating it that way. So, whoops, that's okay. We'll stay here for a second. So it's on that public outcry that the Clark Fork Coalition was born in 1985. And representatives of the Clark Fork Coalition, I was not here at that time, the Clark Fork Coalition went on to sit down with representatives of the Champion Pulp Mill and with regulators to try to hammer out a way to figure out this settling pond problem in a way that did not degrade the river. Now, this was a unique approach at the time because it really brought diverse stakeholders together. It used the best available science, and it approached it with this can-do, watershed-wide perspective. And so that has defined the Clark Fork Coalition over the years. And by 1985 then, victory at the pulp mill, what next? I don't know if the founders, Vicki, maybe you know about this, but they had this uncanny sense of how to build an organization, how to build a movement. They seemed to recognize that we needed first and foremost a mission, a simple, clear mission. Mission at the time, protect and improve the quality of the Clark Fork watershed. They also recognized that they needed to sell people on this crazy, ambitious vision that such a degraded, bedraggled watershed could actually become clean, healthy, and whole again. And they also recognized that the movement will fail if it's only run by a few fired up environmentalists. So in the very first newsletter edition, Currents Volume 1, Number 1, they address that. You know, is cleanup possible? Sure it is. But it will require a broad-based effort from citizens, diverse interests throughout the basin, more than just the reliance of a handful of conservationists. The Clark Fork Coalition is committed to spearheading this effort. Marching orders there. Lily, where's the trivia?
After the next one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought I was going to get a break to have a speaker. Okay, let's move on then. This is the moment when we now start to turn the page into the era of restoration and recalibration. So before we start in doing a bit of sort of a decade by decade snapshot, I do want to say that the Clark Fork Coalition has always worked in partnership with other groups and people. And at the heart of everything that we do has been a community of diverse interests. Whether it's just individuals, whether it's businesses, students, professors, even industry people. We work in partnership. We are stronger together. So now let's roll through some of these decades. Here we are, it's the late 80s. We've got a group that's full of energy and excitement, and we're going to make a difference. But guess what? We're facing a lot of serious issues. We've got legacy mining waste coating the upper Clark Fork. We're also dealing with Milltown Dam, which at that time was quite unstable, and there were some concerns that it would just collapse, unleashing this torrent of contaminated sediments sitting behind the dam from that 1908 flood I flashed up a little bit ago. We also had concerns about chronic low flows. Again, 100 years of producing food through irrigated agriculture created some real issues, in particular the Bitterroot, but also the upper Clark Fork. Another major issue, Vicki's favorite of all time, algae slime, foam, you know, the stuff, the smell, feel, see stuff. It was pretty awful, and it affected the entire basin. So pretty big, daunting issues. What did the Clark Fork Coalition do? We got busy. Let's go clockwise. Phosphate bans. We immediately went to work in every single community in the watershed, in every county, and were able to get past these phosphate detergent bans. Phosphate is responsible for causing spikes in nutrient pollution, algae, slime, etc. We were also able to secure some federal funding for a whole basin study of nutrient pollution and how we could go about fixing the problems. So, big gains there on the nutrient pollution front. Here in the Upper Clark Fork, the Clark Fork Coalition was able to get Superfund designation of the entire river system. Back in the mid-'80s, we realized that we've already got some federal Superfund sites designated for some polluted areas in Butte, like the Berkeley Pit, for example, and also, it turns out, the Milltown Dam. That was deemed a Superfund site because of all of the arsenic-rich and contaminated sediments sitting behind the Milltown Dam thanks to that flood. Well, we thought, okay, you got problems in Butte, you got problems in the reservoir. Those chemicals actually are the same. They match up. You've got arsenic, copper, cadmium, lead, zinc. So if the river was the conveyor belt, surely the river has some problems too. So we were able to convince the EPA that they needed to study the issue, and sure enough, 120 miles worth of contaminated sediments, though a 50-mile stretch in particular in the Deer Lodge Valley is deemed to be the most acute. With Milltown Dam, we were able to convince the EPA to require ARPO to make ARPO again because it was the owner of the mining operations. They therefore were responsible for footing the bill for cleaning up this whole giant mess that they inherited. So EPA was able to call for repairs to the dam, emergency repairs, so that we did not see some catastrophic accident of a collapsing dam and millions of cubic yards of contamination flowing down the river. And then with dewatering, we also were able to convince the state that this is a serious problem. Things can be done, but we've got to start at least with studying the situation. So the state created a commission that the Clark Fork Coalition served on to take a closer look. So I tried to develop some little key for how to show the progress that we're making here. So little blue check mark, small win. Big check mark, big win, like done. The little green rosy, the riveter, that shows our advocacy work is on track. We know where we need to go. We're making progress. The red refrigerator is, oh my gosh, this is a beast. We're working in a territory of complexity and change. And this is hard, but we're going to keep after it. We have to keep after it. Moving into the 1990s. So in the 1990s, we still have all of those big issues that we're dealing with, the nutrient pollution, the contamination in the Upper Clark Fork, Milltown, still a little iffy, and the dewatering. But guess what? On top of all that, we suddenly have this flurry of new hard rock mining proposals coming our way. Suddenly, we're paying attention, close attention, to a gigantic open pit cyanide heap leach gold mine proposed for the banks of the Upper Blackfoot. We've also got a massive copper mine, copper and silver mine proposed for the Lower Clark Fork underneath the Cabinet Mountains wilderness, underneath fragile wilderness lakes and streams. In addition, this Pegasus gold mine that I told you about, how the group took a pass on making that sort of the founding issue, instead went to the pulp mill. It turns out after a few short years of operation, Pegasus Gold went bankrupt, shut down the mine. They didn't really have any reclamation funds per se. So yeah, declared bankruptcy, and here we have what we think is probably another toxic mess on our hands. That needed attention. Also in the 90s, a petroleum pipeline got proposed for getting laid in right along 9 Mile Creek and the 9 Mile Valley. So that didn't seem like such a great idea in terms of protecting water quality. So we realized we'd have to roll up our sleeves with that. In addition, it came to light that all of the chlorine bleaching that this pulp mill, now owned by Smurfit, it had this toxic byproduct, dioxin, which it turns out was quite cancer-causing, and the dioxin was going straight into the river and up into the air. Then again, with chronic dewatering in our headwater sub-basins up Clark Fork Bitterroot, that was worsening to the point where on sort of low snowpack years, hot, dry summers, you could cross most tributaries and stretches of those two rivers without even getting your sneakers wet. So we had even more things to get busy on. So let's talk a little quickly about some of the accomplishments on that front. Nutrients. Nutrients, some big wins there. We were able to broker an agreement with the basin's 4 largest dischargers, including the Missoula wastewater treatment plant, that held them to certain nutrient targets. In other words, they couldn't go above those. They all agreed to do this. It was voluntary, so it was a thing of its kind. But we were also able to ensure that those voluntary targets got converted into state law. And those targets still exist in state law to this very day. Bleaching, stop. That's an issue where we teamed up with other community activists and were able to pressure Smurfit Stone to stop the bleaching and therefore reduce the dioxin loading going into our airshed and into our river. One of my favorite pieces, because this is when, actually I arrived in 1992, and this was the first issue that I got cut loose on. So joining with other conservation groups, we were able to get a citizens initiative in front of the voters. And the citizens initiative was a proposal to outlaw, to completely ban the use of open pit cyanide heap leach gold mining in the state of Montana. It was a slam dunk. It passed, I think the percentage of people voting for it was in the 70s. So that was incredibly exciting. The dewatering issue, we were able to convince the state to actually close 2 basins, both the Upper Clark Fork and the Bitterroot, to new water allocations, just so that the problem wouldn't continue to get worse. That defunct mine, the Beal Mountain mine, that's a challenge. That's still a big, fat, red refrigerator because there seemed to be no interest by regulators, by the federal government, to try to understand the problems that were occurring there. The pipeline, petroleum pipeline proposed for the 9 Mile. We worked with local community members and catalyzed opposition to that pipeline to the point where the company eventually just said, okay, fine, cancel. We'll do something else. So big victory there. And then with the cabinet mines, we were able to hold those in check just because we were able to look at the environmental assessments and determine that there were some major flaws, complete lack of integrity in the scientific analysis. So the miners had to go back to the drawing board. Let's look at our little icons. We're making some success. Little green rosy riveters everywhere, little check marks. You know, we're making progress. And a couple big slam dunks. Done. No cyanide heap leach mining in Montana. Done. No pipeline. Still issues with low flows. Issues with the Pegasus gold mine. Oh, here's the trivia. Hello. We'll take a break and I'll have a sip of tea. Question. A host of chemical processes contribute to acid mine drainage. The greatest contributor by far is the oxidation of what common Montana mineral? Do we have a soundtrack?
Looks like you do.
Doesn't look to me as they were giving this much effort, except Ethel. Ethel, you got a line on something. down. Okay. Vicki, you got it? Okay, let's move on. New decade, 2000s. Whew. Put on your seatbelts. You can just feel the pace of things picking up. You can feel the river movement taking off. You're starting to get a handle on what needs to be done with some of these chronic contamination issues, dewatering issues, and threats. But that just means that we're able to sort of raise our sights and address a few more issues that are affecting the health of the watershed. Let's take a look. Milltown Dam. So we're starting to get close to decision time. EPA is about to decide the future of that Superfund site. And so we are very concerned that the EPA is going to take the easy way out, the way that pleases ARCO, and basically just shore up the dam, fence off the reservoir, call it good. So we realize that's a big issue that we need to pay a lot of attention to. Upper Clark Fork, same thing. EPA was getting closer to a decision on that. And at the same time, we had a sense of urgency. Let's get going, because all of these unremediated slickens, as they're called, are continuing to be a source of contamination to the Clark Fork River. So that was weighing on us. Then we also, in conversations with partners, landowners, ranchers in the Upper Clark Fork, we realized there was cleanup fatigue and cleanup skepticism among landowners who would be affected by the cleanup that was coming their way. So we thought we need to tackle that. In addition, there's that dang Beale Mountain mine again. We've discovered that there are some serious issues. Selenium, cyanide, contaminating native trout strongholds. That would need some attention. And then, oh my goodness, we're in the Upper Blackfoot now, in this whole Mike Horse tailings dam that has been just trapped in negotiations and battles and conversations by the responsible parties. We're realizing that just needs a little bit of a push. We need to be holding some people's feet to the fire. This tailings dam failed in the 1970s, flushing contamination into the Upper Clark Fork, into the Blackfoot, rendering the river lifeless for the first top 5 miles. So we didn't want to see that happening again. We also discovered that, holy smokes, a power plant that was supposed to be a pretty benign cogen plant got built, but as a coal-fired power plant. So we wanted to try to get to the bottom of this. This was in Thompson Falls, in the lower Clark Fork. And finally, guess what? Those copper mines again. Now a second copper mine has been proposed. We thought that one was not going to happen because it was sort of laying low, copper prices weren't favorable, and we thought it had been completely abandoned. It's back, the Montanore mines. We've got Rock Creek Mine and Montanore Mine proposed for underneath the cabinets in the lower Clark Fork. And then on top of it all, this is early 2000s, and many of you remember, there was suddenly this development, this spike in development. Housing starts going up right and left. And of course, people are fascinated by water. Humans are drawn to water, as we know. So some of these subdivisions were proposed for usually riverside, streamside, gorgeous areas, but absolutely, completely inappropriate for construction. So there was one proposed for the mouth of Rock Creek that we were particularly disturbed about. But there must have been at least a dozen in the Upper Clark Fork, the Blackfoot, the Bitterroot, that we realized that we needed to weigh in on. So it was a busy decade. Let's take it from the top. Plant, that coal-fired power plant, we were able to pressure the state of Montana to actually take a close look at some of the violations we were seeing with the whole permit for a cogen plant that mysteriously turned into a garden variety coal-fired power plant. And the state issued fines that were so steep that the company ended up shutting down and dismantling the plant. My course, we also were able to catalyze the public to write in to state regulators and federal regulators, calling on them to call for a cleanup plan that actually removed that tailings dam and restored that site. We ended up generating 10,000 comments which is basically the regulators getting buried by comments. And so guess what? Done. They called for removal of the tailings dam and cleanup began. In the Upper Clark Fork, I talked a little bit about this cleanup skepticism and cleanup fatigue. Well, it turns out, actually maybe I should quickly skip down here. I'll come back to that ranch in just a minute. So in the Upper Clark Fork, a cleanup plan did come out in 2005, and it was fantastic. The plan that EPA and the Department of Environmental Quality chose or selected called for 50-foot buffers, removing all this contaminated mining waste, and 50 feet on either side of the river. Hundreds of miles of floodplain cleaned up in about a 50-mile stretch of the river. We were very excited about what this would mean for river health. But when we went to talk to landowners and ranchers who again would be affected by cleanup because most of it is on private property, we discovered, meh. In fact, they were very excited about it at all because no one knew what that would look like. What would that mean for their agricultural operations? They didn't want state backhoes and bulldozers coming into riparian pasture and ripping everything up and causing them bankruptcy. So what we decided was, okay, we just need to find a ranch, a fixer-upper in the most polluted part of that whole 50-mile stretch of river, and take it through the paces ourselves. It can be a learning site. We can be the guinea pig. Let's see what happens, and let's let the agencies, the cleanup agencies, learn from the experience as well, so that we can all figure out how to harmonize cleanup with a thriving agricultural operation. Let's see, protect it from development. I will say we had some wins and losses there, but I'm so excited that we actually were able to beat back a subdivision that was proposed for the mouth of Blue Ribbon Trout Stream Rock Creek. And we were also able to shut down about 10 other subdivisions proposed for fragile areas in the Blackfoot, fragile areas in the Middle Clark Fork, and fragile areas in the Bitterroot. So what we signaled to state permitting agencies is that we're watching. People are watching. And you've got to follow the books and you've got to protect the river. The Beal Mountain Mine, we actually ended up having to take legal action there just to get the attention of the federal regulators. We had done the science, we'd done the fish studies, and we were able to prove you've got a big problem, you've got to fix it. So the federal government decided to also make Beal Mountain Mine a Superfund site, and they began putting together a cleanup plan. And then a big one, holy smokes, Milltown. It's now cleaned up and flowing free, and that all happened. The decision came down to remove the dam, clean up the reservoir, and then the work started and got finished almost in that decade. I think it spilled over into 2011. But that was just an amazing campaign, an amazing project to be a part of. And then here, again in the cabinet, those copper mines, 2 of them now, we ended up having to take to the courts. The permits were flying right and left out of both the federal government and the state government, and our opinion was they're violating all of the laws that are on the books, so let's let the courts decide. And with every single case, the courts just ruled with us. So big decade, big wins, big fat check marks in several places. You know, again, we've got some of those red refrigerators that are so challenging in the Upper Clark Fork and again Beal, but look at that, Milltown cleaned up and flowing free. Amazing. Let's move, trivia. Trivia time. With the removal of the Milltown Dam over 200 miles, about 2/3 of the Clark Fork River became free flowing. Where are the 3 remaining hydroelectric dams located on the Clark Fork River? Good luck.
Not the
Not the
basin,
basin.
just the Clark Fork River. Great clarifying question. We could add some, we did the basin.
And they don't have to be not all of them.
Vicky's giving hints. No one's on the phones, right? Did we ban Googling? No. I don't know what the prize is. Is it worth? No.
Really good.
Is it worth cheating? Is it?
Some
It
of
never
them.
is. It never pays off. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. 2010s. 2010s, also big decade. Why? Here's what was driving our organizational planning and activity during this decade. So we recognized that the removal of Milltown Dam and the beginning of cleanups in the Upper Clark Fork actually swung open the door to restoration from the headwaters all the way to the terminus that we felt like was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up. And we also recognized, in some ways, this is a race against the clock. We were seeing the accelerating impacts of climate change. We were seeing more growth and development, over-allocation of water supplies. We realized this is the decade to hit it with restoration. And we had several partners who had robust restoration programs, but we realized there's just too much work to do. So maybe this was something that we needed to look into, launching a stream restoration program. So moving along, other things that are on our mind. Okay, I talked about no dam, restoration time. Again, Upper Clark Fork, I mentioned this, so many degraded streams, and the Upper Clark Fork had just been written off by so many people, so many funders even. And so we realized it was going to be a heavy lift, but we needed to really pick up this sort of tributary restoration challenge in the Upper Clark Fork. Same with the Bitterroot. Tons of work to do in the Bitterroot, as Ron knows all about. And more than really any groups existing could take on by themselves. So we were looking at perhaps bringing some restoration resources to the Bitterroot. Also on our mind, again, extreme low flows. Something needs to give here. The chronic dewatering is a big issue in the Bitterroot and in the Upper Clark Fork, and we're just not getting after it. So some more thinking on that needs to happen. And here's our friend the Cabinet Mines again. Regulators going to permitting drive again. Flurry of permits coming out, so we realized we got to engage on not one, but two of these mines. Then with the ranch that the Clark Fork Coalition purchased, we realized, okay, it's go time. Cleanup has begun, and we've got to fulfill the promise of that ranch. And we better have a good report to share with our rancher neighbors, because we really need them to participate in the Superfund cleanup to make sure that the Upper Clark Fork is a success. Then we're also seeing, with all the growth and development happening, serious issues with what is called exempt wells. That's permit exempt wells, where if you fall beneath some threshold, maybe, 10 acre-feet, 35 gallons per minute, then
On hold right now.
on hold right now. But back then, not on hold. And it was being, I would say, abused. We would see, it makes sense in some cases for a single dwelling, someplace in a rural area, to get into a permit exempt well. But what we're discovering is that developers were actually putting in huge rural subdivisions where every single household had an exempt well. So suddenly you've got this proliferation of what we call straws in the groundwater, completely unregulated, totally unmonitored, sucking down groundwater, which is having an effect on surface water, and somewhat disrupting the senior water rights schematic that we have in Montana. So we knew that needed attention too. And then, big issue here. Turns out, Missoula's water had never been in public ownership, but the private ownerships or owners had been very, very low key, so a lot of Missoula didn't even realize it until the Carlisle group moved into town, put in a proposal to buy the water from a California owner, and made it happen. So this was an issue that was a huge concern for us, and I'll get into the solution there. It was quite an interesting campaign and ultimately a successful campaign, but that was a big issue starting in the early 2010s. Okay, let's talk about what happened. Taking it from the top and we'll go clockwise again. Restoration. Talked about the need for that. This was an opportunity, and there are so many degraded creeks and streams out there. Could the Clark Fork Coalition make a difference? Yes, we could, and yes, we have. We launched a stream restoration program and immediately went to work in the upper Clark Fork. Help on the way there. The Bitterroot, help on the way there. And then the other thing we decided to do was to sweep in the Montana Water Trust. We did a strategic acquisition and brought in the Montana Water Trust and their skills and expertise in brokering water transactions with landowners such that we could either acquire the water right or lease the water right or do a project that freed up water that we would then manage as in-stream flow. Let's move to, exempt wells loophole. Holy smokes, what a battle. But we got that closed. I've used the little quotation marks because it turned out that's a pesky little loophole. It sprung back open again, but as Amy said, things are on hold right now. Things are looking good. But they're looking good because of a lawsuit that the Clark Fork Coalition and some ranchers ended up winning, challenging this water policy. And we actually went all the way up to the Supreme Court and we won. But the tricky thing is that it sprang back open because there's just other hacks that developers have discovered to just try to keep this loophole alive and continue to do massive subdivisions with each home on an exempt well. Okay, so victory there. Oh wait, sorry, ranch, mission accomplished. We had a successful cleanup of that ranch. We were very transparent with our neighbors, landowners, other ranchers about what worked, what didn't. The agencies really appreciated better understanding how agricultural operations work and what makes sense for ranchers. So because of that demystification project, we've got landowners now signed up to go through cleanup themselves. It's happened with a few, and everyone has reported, I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, things happen, but ranchers are not going bankrupt. They're getting properly compensated for repairing pastures that do get damaged. They're getting compensated for clean soil that they're able to sell to put back on the land where the dirty soil's been taken out. So we were very pleased with how that ended up working out. Mountain water, guess what? New owner, the people. So the Clark Fork Coalition ended up partnering with the city on a big gamble. When Carlisle first put in to buy the water system, there's a public process in front of the Public Service Commission. And everybody expected the city and the Clark Fork Coalition to come down against it, like, heck no, we are not selling to Carlisle Group, a corporate investment company that will treat our water as a commodity. But we saw that this is a potential opportunity because the current owner in California had zero interest in ever selling to the city. In fact, the relationship had gone rancid, and we pretty much understood that never ever would that owner let it happen. So we thought if we can develop a relationship with the Carlisle Group and actually put that in front of them, yes, we will support your play for the water, and you will sell it to the city in 5 years. Well, unfortunately, the language, the letter agreement that we were able to hammer out with 3 entities did not have quite that solid right of first refusal legal language, so guess what? Carlisle decided, nah, not so interested in selling. So the city, with the Clark Fork Coalition as one of the many experts in the trial, ended up taking Carlisle to court and filed a condemnation action claim against Carlisle and won. So, new water owner, the people. What have we not explored? The mines again. Gosh, this is just a long-term project and program that we've been working on, but the mines are in check once again, thanks to more legal action. At this point, our group of allies has expanded to include the tribes and several other conservation groups, even nationwide groups. So we feel like we've got a good strategy here. We're not there yet, though. Let's check in literally big fat check marks with exempt wells closed, kind of. Things are happening. We know where we need to go with tributary restoration. We've got strategies. We're focused on a specific network of targeted streams. Ranch, done. Things are happening in the Bitterroot. Water, done. Mines in check. It was a good decade for the river. Trivia. Let's do this. 13 cubic feet per second translates to roughly how many gallons per water? Per day of water. Whoa.
Let's switch those.
Okay.
I go on my.
Gallons.
This is
Per water.
theoretically calculable.
We're gonna get hard.
And a little, if you have your pen out, I have a little hint for you. I'm sure you know how many seconds are in a minute, but you might not know how many minutes are in a day. That's 1,440 minutes in a day. We take rough estimates. In trivia only.
Nothing else.
Nothing else.
The trivia. Are they? Well, we have to here for reference to CSC's converted to 96 CFS of water receiving for the last 2 decades.
Second one's not a question.
So, exclamation points. Okay. Not a question. This is
It was a question when I asked it of our stream flow team.
'Were you doing the calculations yourself? Do we know the answer?
I know the answer.
Okay.
No, I already know the answer. I'm just saying if I can get it done in the amount of time you take for a break here. Oh, yeah, I can get it done. Again, there are 1,440 minutes in a day. We have to
40 minutes?
Second.
Yes.
No, minutes in a day.
Time is still going strong? I'm just checking to see. It's still calculating. Okay, I see mostly pens not on paper. So in we go. To the last partial decade. We're only 4 years into the 2020s. But here's kind of the mindset here at the Clark Fork Coalition in this decade so far. As a result of some strategic planning and assessments that we did in the early part of this particular decade, we've become really alert to the fact that we've got accelerating impacts of climate change that are aggravating some of these other stressors that we've been working on for the past 30+ years. We're also recognizing that we still have these lingering contamination issues. Actually, let's keep going. I think I've got some photos of this. We've got these continuing lingering contamination issues happening. Even though a cleanup plan is in place in the Upper Clark Fork, and the work began in 2011 and then continued onto our ranch in 2016 and Grant Coors and several other properties, we're only a third of the way done, and we've got another 30 miles to go. So at this rate, it's going to be at least another 15, 30 years, if not more. But again, as long as we have unremediated stretches of the floodplain and stream banks and these slickens, sitting exposed to our dynamic Montana environment, we run the risk of continued pollution to the Clark Fork. And now the stakes are higher because we've got sections that are cleaned up and we don't want to see them recontaminated. Same thing as Smurfit. Dynamic climate, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when that river's going to flood. It wants to move into the site where we've got a whole lot of industrial contamination. We've got to get after it. Our message to EPA for years has been stop dinking around. We know we've got to clean it up. So let's get going on that. Let's stop all quibbling about whether or not we've got the data we need. We do need data, but we think that a decision can get made that yes, let's clean it up, and then let's study it go as we know. We also got, again, these headwater subbasins and the raft of degraded streams. It feels, again, like a race against the clock, trying to get to all of these streams that are in need. And then we're noticing that Grant Creek here in Missoula is poised for concentrated growth and development. But guess what? The lower 6 miles of that creek suffers all manner of degradation. And we're just concerned that the door is going to swing shut on this vision that we've had for a number of years of really trying to do a headwaters to mouth restoration of that stream, which is an important bull trout stronghold. So we're concerned about that, getting in front of development. Again, we're also concerned about the dewatering and realize, okay, the Clark Fork Coalition now has skills and expertise to broker these water transactions to get water back in the stream, but that's slow work. We're working with irrigators and landowners. There's a lot of trust building. There's a lot of figuring out what will work for their operations. Are there some other more innovative strategies that can really scale up the work and accelerate the work, such as headwater subbasins? Can we expand capacity of many of the reservoirs that we have in the Bitterroot or the Upper Clark Fork to release water slowly and keep creeks and streams wet and connected to the river all year? What about beaver? Promote beaver on the landscape rather than writing the beaver off as being some nuisance rodent. Could we put the beaver to work? Then, again, the cabinet mines, goodness gracious, we're still at risk. Now the cabinet mines are owned. Actually, they were purchased in the late 20-teens by North America's biggest silver producer, Hecla Mining. So we've been very concerned that they've actually got the bandwidth to get this done. So we need to keep track of that. So progress we've made on these fronts. Huge progress with beaver. We've done a statewide push partnering with groups like the National Wildlife Federation and defenders of wildlife. And there's now a state beaver management plan in place. And we've got beaver conflict resolution technicians spreading out in different basins to help landowners troubleshoot or MacGyver some of their infrastructures so that it doesn't attract beaver and cause these nuisance problems. So big win with beaver. Grant Creek, this is one of Lily's favorite projects because she's been intimately involved in that. But guess what? We've now got a vision in place and a plan for restoring the lower 6 miles of Grant Creek. And we've got agencies and the city totally bought in. Everyone's behind this idea that we need to restore that creek in advance of development. Flows. Our water transactions are picking up. We now have, we're managing a portfolio of water rights that puts 10 billion gallons back into thirsty creeks and streams every year. So that's a pretty substantial amount. And pretty much everywhere where we've got a project, those tributaries stay connected to their main stems. We've never had a problem with them going completely dry. Smurfit. We launched a public campaign to shine a spotlight on the situation and hold EPA's feet to the fire. Let's get going with the cleanup. Let's make this a priority. And our stream restoration program is going gangbusters. We have done projects on 22 streams and counting that have opened up 80 miles of stream habitats, that have removed 30 miles of eroding forest roads, and that have removed dozens of fish passage barriers and also prevented tens of thousands of fish from getting caught and dying in irrigation ditches. So big things happening there, and there's some fantastic federal funding that's coming into play that is really allowing groups like the Clark Fork Coalition and Trout Unlimited, Blackwood Challenge to really up the energy on stream restoration. Big progress with the mines. Actually, we finally discovered that Hekla's losing its patience, and they pulled one mine. They're done. Rock Creek mine, done. Montanore still on hold. So good things happening here in the 2020s. There's our little check marks, little ones suggesting progress, but we don't have the big fat red refrigerators just yet. Oh, trivia time. Trivia time. Is this the last trivia?
This is the last one.
Okay, dig deep, everybody. Dig deep.
This is digging deep.
Okay, should I read all this or?
Do you want me to read it, Karen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we're pulling it back kind of to the issues we have. And the issue that started all the Clark Fork Coalition and Smurfit Stone. If you guys have been following, you might recognize some of the words. If you haven't been, I'll try and give you the definitions to them. So when things are hazardous to human health, they're measured in like these really tiny amounts. Micrograms per liter. The standard for arsenic, that's the compound that was in Milltown Dam that triggered, the removal of that. It's the standard to human health is 0.01 microgram. Furans and dioxins, some of those compounds that we're worried about being at Smurfit Stone, are hazardous in concentrations that are much, much smaller than that. And the question is, how much smaller are the standards for furans and dioxins? Again,
You want
this
a
is an
number or just like a
estimate.
general term, like greater or a lot more?
Yeah, we're looking for the right number of zeros is really what we're looking for in this answer.
A whole bunch.
A whole bunch, that's a good answer.
Yeah, the right number of zeros is probably where I'll draw the line.
The trivia is very hard.
Life is hard, Deb.
Tough love.
Tough lessons.
My life is hardest when you're young.
Wilderness?
When we're
Old
done.
song.
Who's that? No spoilers. Martin Chapman.
Also done by the Austin Long Division.
That is profound. Okay, let's move on. Let's bring it home. Okay, so I've just taken you on this rapid fire journey through nearly 40 years of work to help the Clark Fork watershed heal and thrive, and to deliver on my organization's promise back in 1985. So the question is, did we actually deliver? Did we prove up the questions that we asked back then? Is cleanup possible? Is cleanup of a degraded watershed that has had such severe impacts, is it even possible? And I would say, just based on that rapid fire list of things where we've been making a difference, emphatically, yes. We are improving the health of the Clark Fork. We're improving it through some monumental wins, through more incremental wins, and through a lot of wins that just simply aren't even visible anymore, somewhat out of sight, out of mind. But all of them have been powered by a growing group of people who are speaking up on behalf of the river. So it's fair to ask, well, is the watershed healthier for all this effort? There's really no sort of hard and fast measure or way to answer that question. But what I would say is, if we look at the sum of the parts, we see this story of renewal emerging, and we see the restorative capacity, the recuperative capacity of the river on full display. Look at that. I mean, you didn't have that when the Clark Fork Coalition first came into being. Now, it's all well and good to do this sort of journey down memory lane, to revisit all of the threats tackled, all of the victories delivered, because celebration is important. There's power in celebrating the progress. But one thing I want to emphasize, it's just important to remember that we're not done. In fact, the work on behalf of the river is forever work. And having been involved in it for 31 years now, I can attest to the fact that it is joyous work, it is exhilarating work, it is richly rewarding work, and it is hard work. But we have to stay after it. We have to stay after it everlastingly and intentionally. So, how do we create that intention? What does that look like? Here's a suggestion to you. I know I'm the outgoing executive director, but I'm just going to put this out there. Suggestion would be, we need to make the protection of freshwater river systems like the Clark Fork River central to everything that we do as a society. And that may sound a little radical, a little idealistic, but I would say that it's no more radical than suggesting that a house be given a solid foundation before we start adding stories on top of it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, water is essential to life. Water is the foundation for every single human enterprise. And if that foundation is insecure, everything built upon it, everything sustained by it, will be insecure too. So I want to leave you with one guiding thought and with one request. Guiding thought too, as we plunge into the next 40 years of helping the Clark Fork become clean, healthy, and whole again. We have to remember that we're talking about dramatic change. Everybody saw what state the Clark Fork watershed was in the early 1980s. So this is dramatic change, and we have to remember that dramatic change is the accumulation of acts, small and large, sustained for the long haul. We're in it for the long haul here. Here's my request to you. Many of you, I know, are engaged in, involved in the cause for the river. Thank you so much. If this is a cause that you want to get involved in, I would say do it now and grab as many friends as you can. And I have to say, there are so many opportunities to help. Every single one of those victories that I talked about, that was because people came together, diverse citizens and stakeholders came together to speak up for and act on behalf of the river. So I would say, nobody says it more succinctly than our friend Mandela when she says, conservation is not a spectator sport. That is so true. I would even add that it is not a solo sport. As I've mentioned, the Clark Fork Coalition partners with all manner of people who are also working at different aspects of the challenge to help the watershed become clean and healthy and whole. And all of us need the help of individual citizens. So please help, please get involved. The river needs you, the river needs all of us. So thank you. Yes, Greg, question?
I do have a question.
Okay,
It's a really easy one, two-part.
okay.
So, look, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing that overview of the history of Clark Fork Coalition and your own history with the organization. So looking back on your 32 years?
31.
31 years,
Yeah.
plus 28 days,
Yeah.
with the organization. What are you most proud of? What is the single biggest accomplishment that you are most proud of? And see, that was the easy part. And I'm not necessarily from a scientific perspective, but more personal in terms of people or collaboration or projects. And then if you could wave your magic wand and fast forward 3 to 5 years without putting any pressure on the organization going forward without you, what's the single biggest thing that you would like to see accomplished in the next 3 to 5 years?
That one.
This question is great. wow, that's like
A little macro
favorite child or
perspective.
something. Yeah, so thinking historically, I don't want to dodge the question by being all abstract, but I'm just so pleased that this actually is a river movement. It's not just a small group of scientists doing good work on behalf of the river. This is a movement that communities up and down the river own. And I think, as I said to a reporter once, when I first moved here in 1992, that river was like a ghost town. I remember I went on a run in my first week with a friend. It was hot. I said, hey, let's jump into the Clark Fork to cool off. He looked at me like I was insane and said, no way, absolutely not. Not unless you like bathing in arsenic and heavy metals. Like, no. But now you look at the river on a hot summer day, and there's hundreds of boats. Granted, there's the dark underbelly of all that kind of recreation, but we're working on that too. So I'm just thrilled to see Missoula's truly a river city, and so many other communities are coming online that way too. So I've totally dodged like the best, biggest, greatest victory. But if I did have to talk about that, so tough. There's probably three. Removal of Milltown Dam. Absolutely ecstatic about that. Seeing Missoula's water brought into public ownership. Because it's not just a water utility. It's lakes in the Rattlesnake. It's the entire Rattlesnake Creek. It's groundwater. That's huge for this community, especially when you think about some of the challenges coming down the pike. And I think maybe just because it was my very first campaign as a young enviro activist, that cyanide heap leach gold mine up the Blackfoot, that would have been devastating for that river. So there's my top three. Is that
Awesome.
Does that scratch that itch of yours?
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, going forward. Going forward in 5 years, we just need more water in the system. We really need more water. Water's life. It actually does solve a lot of issues. I mean, I'm not a proponent of the solution to pollution is dilution, but there's something there. If you create more water and provide more habitat for critters, you're making a healthy river system. And our communities need it too. There's just something soul-sucking about seeing that river go dry. And then you see explosion of algae, slime, foam. So I really think that we need a lot more water in the river. I'm myself a little hyped up about Smurfit, and some of my sort of non-conservation folks say, relax, you've got this. It's done. It's hit its tipping point. It's going to happen. I just want to see it done.
Right.
So, does that satisfy that question?
I wasn't looking for satisfaction.
A lot of it is just rewilding. Do you know if there's been any research on how fast recovery proceeded after the ice ages? Bulldozed to bedrock and flushed into eastern Washington.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great trivia question. Lily, I don't know. But I mean,
Too easy for this.
But when you think about some little projects that you see completed, it's amazing how just life rushes back in. You add habitat, life rushes back in. You add water, life rushes in. It's just amazing to me, and such a really a hopeful message and inspiring message for all of us. Vicki?
I just want to repeat your statement that watershed keeping is forever, because we had a tremendous, the Clark Fork generated the first numeric nutrient standards in the country, and states all over the country started adopting our approach, and then our legislature repealed them.
Yeah.
And so now we're fighting back on that. So it's always the case that those former victories can suddenly get undone.
That's so good.
And they are out for the state's current plan of what to do with new narrative standards are out for comment right now.
That's good to
But
know.
it's unfortunately a very, very complicated mess.
Yeah,
So,
it's forever work. Deb?
Curious about Flint Creek and that mercury question in the Clark Fork and the related fetal issues with the fetal chicks that don't survive. It's kind of a quiet topic. What do you know about where that's going?
Yeah, that is a quite hot, burning topic. I'm not completely up to speed on the status, but I think the good news was at least EPA was able to broker some landowner agreements with the landowners, because where there's the most pollution is actually now privately owned, where some of these old mines that generate the mercury privately owned. So suddenly you get into this quagmire of needing landowner permission. But my understanding is after years of resistance, landowners are on board. I don't know if backhoes are in, scooping out contamination or not. But that is a great question. I'm probably a year behind in an update on that. So I'm not sure yet, but that's, yeah. I think that people are on it. Yeah, that's good news. Any other questions? Great.
Wait, I got one.
Okay.
One last
Who
trivia
won?
question for the team before we give you the answers. I think, are you done?
I'm done.
Yeah. Okay. All right, one last trivia question. Thanks you guys for sticking with that. And like, what a treat, right? To get to hear. Much of a closing for Karen, but like Karen, if you have not met her in real life, can anybody tell that she's like extremely competitive? Were there any sports references in this talk? You know, one thing that Karen's like true nature has lent to the Cartography Coalition is that idea of like really savvy strategy, because you're not going to win without a good game plan. That idea of like, you need a team to do this work that she just spoke about. And then that tenacity to say like, we're gonna win big on these issues. And it's such a legacy. We're so grateful to you on behalf of the river and all of the communities it touches. We owe you a big thank you, Karen. And like to join that team, a lot of people in this room already are. If you're not part of that team, stop by on your way out and sign up to become part of our mailing list, where we can send you updates on this stuff and we can send you ways to get involved. We have some upcoming things. We have the big community cleanup that's happening this weekend. There's still time to come out and join us on Sunday at Caris Park, 9:30, and the rest of our community as we get out and tackle like one of the most visible problems, you know, trash on the river, and be part of that. Lots of other ways to be involved coming up throughout the year. So I encourage you to stop by, kind of back by Jess. We have a table with some stuff, with some Smurfit, petition, postcards, all kinds of stuff back there. And also, thank you, Karen, but thank you guys, because those questions were dang hard. Like, I had to look up the answers to tie those in. Hopefully, I'm going to give you one last question that's going to be a little bit easier, and then I'll give you the answers. So this will hopefully send you out on a high note, maybe one that sounds like this. Can you name the species?
Is it a song or the species? What, do you want the song or do you want the species?
Species.
The song of this species.
The species song is what it's supposed to say. We added these in last minute. All right. Are we ready for answers? Okay. Very first question. Song. Who knows it? I know somebody's got it. Bruce Springsteen, The Boss, The River. That's my personal favorite river song.
I got the boss now.
Question number 1 was Bruce Springsteen singing The River. Question number 2, what's the largest body of water, largest tributary to the Clark Fork river system? That's going to be the Flathead River.
So why isn't the Clark Fork considered a tributary to the Flathead? Because the
Read it.
Flathead has a larger flow.
Heresy.
It's heresy. Oh, but Vicky knows the answer.
Oh, yeah, well, this is what I was told by geographers. They
They
named
named
by
what?
the length of the river, not by the volume of the river.
Huh.
So so the upper Clark Fork is.
Well, I stand corrected.
There you go.
Question?
All right, what would it take for the entire Clark Fork to be free flowing? It would take 3 more dams being removed. The first one is in
Falls.
Thompson Falls. Thompson Falls is owned by Northwest Energy. The second one is Knoxon, owned by Vista. And the third one,
Herod.
Cabinet Gorge.
Cabinet Gorge.
By Herod.
So wasn't wasn't the next question before that?
Oh, did I skip one? Sorry, I skipped one. The acid mine drainage caused by oxidation of what common Montana mineral? Don't let it fool you, it's pyrite.
Oh, yeah.
All right. We're running forward into the math questions, really, tied into that decision, that strategy to acquire the water trust and start dealing and wheeling in water rights and how much water is in the river. The question was 13 CFS, cubic feet per second, equals how many gallons per day? We will take a right number of zeros on this question, and the answer is around 8 million gallons of water per day.
CFS per day and 325,851 gallons per acre foot. Gives you 8,400,112.93 gallons.
Jess and I feel like there should have been a multiple choice.
It should have been multiple choice. To put that in context of the Clark Fork Coalition's 2 decades of water rights acquisition, it's around 62 million gallons of water per day that the Clark Fork Coalition has acquired and leases for in-stream flow.
Nice.
All right, the last question, super hard, looking at different hazardous substances that exist in our watershed. Arsenic, the human health standard is 0.01 micrograms per liter. When we talk about dioxins, things that are found at Smurfit Stone, how much smaller, how much lower is that standard?
0.001.
About 3,000 times smaller in concentration. Those things are hazardous to human health. So it's kind of like an elephant compared to a snowshoe hare. 0.01, 0.0003. 0.0003, I think is what it is. All right, and the very last one, what is that species to end on a high note? We were listening to maybe iris, maybe not. That was an osprey song. All right, so in total, I think there were 7 questions, right?
Yeah.
7 questions. If you got all 7 right,
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
if you got all 7 right, you can go ahead back to Abby and get your trivia prize. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure back there. If you got 6, anybody get of the 7 questions right?
We got 2 of the 3 dams.
2 of the 3 dams, go ahead. 6 of the 7 right?
We got 5.
What about 5? If you got 5 of the 7 questions right, you can go ahead, go back and grab a prize from Abby. And we'll just do it this way so people who got the most right can choose.
Karen, I'm gonna put those lights on.
Karen.